Okay, so we should be streaming now. Let's go double check. Here, that should be streaming. So then if I click on this share button and go to the share link, here, that should be streaming. So then if super. Okay. Alright, so last time it didn't actually stream the whole session last time, but I think it got about half of it. So where we are currently, let's see what to-dos we have in here. So I think the last thing we were working on was we were working on the radial gradients, which is, that's a flyout test. Yeah, it was this one, this gradient utils. So add test, I forgot to do our time here. Let's do that. There we go. So the last we had, yeah, right, gradient string, the radial gradient, ending shape, size, right. Allow using keywords, which is something we did not do. We haven't done the tests around the radial gradients. But I believe because here's where the app is currently. Let's close that. Gradient type, yeah, linear, and then radial. And it has, yeah, that's a radial gradient. Farthest side, closest corner, farthest corner. You can change the Y position and the X position and move it down or up. Move the Y a little over there. You can change the color here. That is indeed, make this one maybe a little bit darker, like there. Yeah, there you go. Even add a color stop. We'd remove it, and then it makes it a whole, or we could put it maybe at about 80, or maybe less, maybe about 75. Could make a color stop here at 0, make it, yeah, that is a radial gradient. Nifty. All right, I want to work on the conic gradient here. Now we haven't actually done, what do the gradient utils tests look like? That's gradient color stops. This is make gradient string. That's, yep, that's the one. Returns a linear gradient string, handles multiple color stop difference, color stops correctly. That would be make gradient string. Make gradient string. Okay. We're gonna do the conic ones first. So this is, let me refresh this. It defaults back to the linear. Let's take a look at the conic gradient function. So how does a conic gradient work? Using conic gradients. The conic gradient CSS function creates an image consisting of a gradient with color transitions rotated around a center point rather than radiating from the center. Example conic gradients include pie charts and color wheels. They can also be used for creating checkerboards and other interesting effects. The conic gradient syntax is similar to the radial gradient syntax, but the color stops are placed around a gradient arc, the circumference of a circle, rather than on the gradient line emerging from the center of the gradient, and the color stops are percentages or degrees. Absolute lengths are not valid. In a radial gradient, the colors transition from the center of an ellipse outward in all directions. With conic gradients, the colors transition as if spun around the center of a circle, starting at the top and going clockwise. Similar to radial gradients, you can position the center of the gradient. Similar to linear gradients, you can change the gradient angle. A basic conic gradient. As with linear and radial gradients, all you need to create a conic gradient are two colors. I think we need the W3 gradient spec. Gradient spec, that should say W3. It's probably this one. Gradient. Linear gradients, the linear gradient notation. Radial gradient, the radial gradient notation. Does conic gradient not have a linear, radial, elliptical, repeat linear, repeat radial, repeat elliptical? Where is conic gradient defined? Oh, okay, so conic gradients are defined on level 4. Stops are chosen to be angle gradients, and since they are produced by varying the rotation angle of a radial gradient, linear gradient, gradient. This is CSS Images module level 4. I see. Okay. What are there, weren't there repeating gradients? This was repeating gradients. Repeating linear gradient, repeating radial gradient, repeating conic gradient. Alright, so we're gonna do a conic gradient. Conic gradient, the conic gradient notation. A conic gradient starts by specifying the center of a circle, similar to radial gradients, except that conic gradient color stops are placed around the circumference of the circle, rather than on a line emerging from the center, causing the color to smoothly transition as you spin around the center, rather than as you progress outward from the center. Conic gradient is specified by indicating rotation angle, the center of the gradient, and then specifying a list of color stops. Unlike linear and radial gradients, whose color stops are placed by specifying a length, the color stops of a conic gradient are specified with an angle. Rays are then drawn emerging from the center and pointing in all directions, with the color of each ray equal to the color of the gradient line where they intersect it. These gradients are called conic or conical because if the color stops are chosen to be significantly lighter on one side than the other, it produces a pattern that looks like a cone observed from above. They are also known as angle gradients in some contexts, since they are produced by varying the rotation angle of a ray. This example visually illustrates how conic gradient at 25%, 30% white, black 60% would be drawn. Note that since color stop positions always resolve to angles, the only effect of the at 25 is a 2D translation of the gradient, i.e. it does not affect how the gradient is drawn. The syntax for a conic gradient is conic gradient from angle at position angular color stop list. The entire gradient is rotated by this angle. If omitted, defaults to 0 degrees. The unit identifier may be omitted if the angle is 0. So, conic gradient. So if gradient type is conic, it would be gradient string equals conic dash gradient conic dash gradient the angle from angle conic gradient from angle should be degrees degree. Let me look at the example they give here for conic gradient. From angle from 20 degrees, there it is, or 2 degrees, 0 degrees, or 10 degrees, or 100 degrees. Super. Red, orange, yellow, green. Red, orange, yellow, green, blue. There it is. From at position from 100 degrees at position. What is a position? Determines the gradient center of the gradient. The position value type, which is also used for background position, CSS value is 3, and is resolved using the center point as the object area and the gradient box as the positioning area. If this argument is omitted, it defaults to center. Position, I believe that's the same. Yeah, I believe it's the same things here, this X position, Y position. at 0 degrees from angle at position, comma, at, you would do the same thing here, math.round x position times 100% math.round y position times 100%, comma, and then color string. So for a conic gradient, I think we're going to need to fly out. Gradient type, ending shape, x position, y position, degrees, gradient options, gradient type equals linear, or gradient options, gradient type equals conic, what do you mean unexpected mix? That's interesting. Degrees, so if we refresh here, we need the gradient type, you have an option. You're going to need a new option of conic, which has conic. A new option of conic, which would then gradient type, if there's a conic, yeah, there it is. That is a conic gradient. Awesome. So now if we change the degree, there's a conic gradient. Awesomeness. Now the circle actually doesn't, the ending shape doesn't have an effect on a conic gradient. The size also doesn't have an effect on a conic gradient. The x position and y position does. You can move that around. So ending shape and size are only for radial. Ending shape, so this one, ending shape and size are only for radial. So this is ending shape, a select and an option. And then a size, so this should actually be wrapped in another div here, like this label and select. So these two, this should be gradient type equals radial, and this one of these, gradient type equals, I think it's options gradient type. Is that the one? Gradient options dot gradient type. Gradient options dot gradient type. And it's the same thing here. This would be gradient options dot gradient type, and we would do this one. Gradient options dot gradient type equals radial, and linear, you have degrees and you have an x position and y position. Now what exactly is the x position and y position doing in linear? It is not involved. Gradient string linear, degrees and color string. Maybe there's a better approach would be to simply disable certain of these boxes. Let me try it with this size option. So let's try a disabled. Gradient options gradient type equals. So if you are radial, disabled is, if you are a radial, that's true. I want disabled to be false. Flip true to false. Otherwise, leave it as false. Let's remove these. That would be size. I think that might be, I think showing it as disabled might be more elegant. Not what I wanted. There we are. Size. Radial when it's linear. Now, isn't there a select? This would be on this select. Now, what is, okay, let's look at the, well, let's look first at the select. Yeah, let's first look at the select element. Disable. It also accepts most of the general formats such as required, disabled, autofocus, etc. Boolean attribute indicates that the user cannot interact with the control. If this attribute is not specified, the control inherits the settings from the containing element, for example, field set. If there is no containing element with the disabled attribute set, then the control is enabled. All right. So yeah, I would have expected, for example, if I do disabled equals true, that is the expectation that I would have had. Gradient options, gradient type equals radial, false. Okay. Why did that save? Okay. Let's let's set it as a string. True. Refresh. There you go. Disabled. True. Radial. Because it's set as a string. True. Okay. So what is gradient options dot gradient to is that doing, I think this is doing gradient options dot gradient type, banging that, and then equals, I think that's the issue there. The opposite of gradient options dot type equals undefined. Yeah, there's the one. Okay, that was silly. Linear size is disabled. Radial size is not disabled. Closest corner. Conic size is disabled. Super. That's much better. I like that approach better. Let us remove these. And let's put this back there. So this is the div for size, which only exists on radial. Ending shape also only exists on radial. So it would be here. Ending shape is this. We can put this over here and then remove that. So ending shape also only exists on radial. Gradient type exists on all of them. Degrees only exists on linear and conic. If gradient type is linear, or gradient options dot gradient type equals conic. If the gradient type is linear or conic, if the gradient type is linear or the gradient type is conic, there's probably an easier way to think about this. Disabled is degrees. Degrees should be disabled when gradient type is radial. So we can do disabled, we can do gradient options, gradient type equals radial, and then we can simplify all of this. That's easier to think about. Degrees is disabled when the gradient type is radial. Okay. Ending shape is disabled when linear or conic. So ending shape is disabled when gradient type is not equal to radial. When gradient type is not equal to radial, gradient type is not equal to radial. If gradient type is linear, disabled. If gradient type is conic, disabled. If gradient type is not equal to radial, gradient type Gradient type not equal to radial, false. Gradient type is radial. Disabled is false for ending shape. Okay. For size, it's the same thing. This gradient type equals radial, banging it is the same as gradient type not equal to radial. So size is only relevant when gradient type is radial. So if gradient type is not equal to radial, disabled is true. Gradient type is linear or conic. Gradient type is equal to radial. This condition is false. Gradient type not equal to radial. It would be radial is not equal to radial, which is false. Disabled is false. Exposition. Exposition is used in, I think it's used in several. Exposition is used in radial and conic. So if it's linear, X position and Y position are disabled in linear. So this would be equals linear. Disabled, gradient type equals linear. Disabled equals linear. Alright, let's look at my sequence of things. So if the gradient type is linear, the only control you get is degrees. That is accurate. If the gradient type is radial, why is the degrees disappearing? Looks like it still has the, yes, it still has this around it. Still has the conditional around it, which we decided against using. Once more. I should flip which one is where. The gradient type should be the first one, really. The gradient type should really be the first thing, and then you have a bunch of other stuff. Then you have degrees, then you have, and why is degrees, yeah, why is degrees in a separate div? It really shouldn't be. It should be part of all of these other ones. Yeah, here you go. Gradient type linear. The only control you get is degrees. Gradient type radial. You don't get degrees, but you do get ending shape, circle or ellipse. Size. You can change the closest size, farthest corner, X and Y position. Radial. Conic. You do get the degrees back. You don't get ending shape or size. You do get X position and Y position. And you still get your color stops. You can make it, how about a yellow? A yellow. Cool. Look at that. And make that less. Or how about a little more? Interesting. That looks like a bug. 50. It won't go up from 56. How interesting. Okay. Actually add another one. That's a conic gradient. And close. Awesome. There is a conic gradient. Super. All right, I would like to. I think I would like to. What do I want to do? I think I would like to write some tests for. I mean, I have the conic gradient. Yeah, so because the other next big thing is that's the select attribute. I think the other next big thing is the repeating of each, repeating linear, repeating radial, and repeating conic. I think is the next big thing. So let me make sure we have the tests for this. Okay, so we need to yeah, let's not have these in, let's not have those values hard-coded. Let's move them out. So we're gonna move all these hard-coded values out into all of these things. We're gonna move these into, we're gonna extract those for easier reuse, because there's a lot of, like, look at this, radial, 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 linear, linear, fair amount of repetition. So we are going to put that in a constants. Yeah, we're going to put that in a constants file. Default gradient options, input pattern, gradient constants. This is going to be, what is this going to be? Something like gradient words. Gradient constants. Not entirely sure what to call this. Export words. Export const words. Not entirely sure what to call this. Because we're thinking about things like, for example, these things. How about gradient keywords? Maybe gradient words? Gradient words? So from, what is this? Gradient constants. So this is import gradient words, yes, that one, from constants, gradient constants. Thank you, that's the one. So these would be things like, radial. Here. Radial. Let's do it actually. Radial. Because that is it's this, and it's gradient words dot radial. So it's whenever we see this, we can replace it with gradient words dot radial. Gradient words dot radial. Same thing here. When we see linear, 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 this here, this would be gradient words dot linear. Where else is radial used? Option, value. This could be the same thing. So this could be replaced as gradient words dot radial. Radial dash gradient, okay. Do the same thing for, I'd probably make that even shorter actually. I could replace gradient words dot radial. So I could do, how is this done? This is gradient words. Is it like this? Is this how you do that? ES 2015 named imports do not destructure. Okay. Got it. So this would be, oops, radial linear equals gradient words. And then all the rest of the time you see gradient words, except that one, not that first one. So really it's gradient words dot is what I'm looking for. Gradient words dot. All of those we can delete. Gradient words. Alright, so we're expecting that not to blow up. Super. I like that. Alright, let's continue with this approach with radial linear. So anywhere you see this can be linear. Also anywhere you see gradient type, export const gradient words linear. If I define this after this one, we can do gradient type. I can do gradient words dot linear. Alright, there's some logic in here. So here we would do import gradient words from constant gradient constants, and then we would do const linear radial gradient words. So linear, anywhere you see this, you can change it to linear. Anywhere you see this, you can change it to radial. Also the same thing for conic. Conic would have one of these over here. Conic. C-O-N-I-C. Would have one of these. we would do CONIC. All right, super. Any other conic? Flyout value, this one, we would do CONONIC, which means we need to add conic here. Wonderful. I mean, I suppose I could do, if I really wanted to, I could do linear gradient radial gradient, and then here, not entirely sure how valuable that is, but I suppose it does keep things consistent. Less hard-coded strings. I would generally find that an improvement. What other hard-coded strings do we have in here? Let's take a look-see. Let's look through app. What do we have? Class name. For class names, I'm okay with hard-coded strings there. Alright, app renders flyout. I suppose we could look through it like here. Look through the source folder. Gradient constants, that's where we're putting them. Gradient utils. I mean the word gradient. I do use the word gradient many times. That should probably be a, except gradient package yarn. Right, but is it, I mean, is it actually used a lot? Or is it in a lot of code? Doesn't really seem to be used a lot, actually. That's in, what is this, gradient utils. Doesn't really seem to be used a lot. It's not a huge improvement. CSS, okay, app.js, there's not much there. App.test.js. Not a ton here. Color.css, color.js. Okay. Not a ton here. Color.test.js. Not a ton. Colors.css. Color. Type the color. Not a ton of things there. Color.test. But although there is definitely work to do there in colors. Colors.test, not really. Flyout.css, flyout.js. There is, these would be a bunch of translation things, yes, definitely in flyout. Flyout.test, not a ton. Index.css, not a ton. Index.js, no. Logo SVG. Setup test, stop positions. Yeah, there's a couple. There's an add in here. Stop positions test. Okay, so there's a handful. There are a handful to use. So specifically, now, but these are, interestingly enough, these are not gradient words. These are I think messages is a common name for them. So we're gonna make a, what are we gonna do? We're gonna make a folder called, should this be in source? Yes, I think that should be in source. Harden. So we're gonna make a folder in source, and source is gonna be called, what's this gonna be called? This is gonna be called messages, no, translations. How about translations? Translations. Inside translations, there's going to be a file called messages.js, and messages.js is going to export const, is going to export default, export default const messages. Only expressions, functions, or classes are allowed as the default expressions, functions, or classes. Const message, and then export default messages. So then messages is going to have add messages, add. So here you are going to have import, but you should not, each one should definitely not be grabbing the messages. So the messages really should be, the messages should be grabbed from app, and then app should give it to everything else. So app should grab messages, so you should import messages from translations, messages, and then you should actually set up a context. So use state, you should set up use context, function app. What is, let's refresh my memory on React context, except I spelled it wrong. Yes, that one. That's the class variety of context. React.create context. Isn't there a context hook? Use context. Ah, yes, okay. In the consumer, the context consumer, right? So I need react.create context. So here, this would be react. React come on now. React dot create context. So that's gonna, let's put this over here so we can see it a little more easily. Oh, not that one. This one. React.create context with a default value of messages. And then context dot provider, the value is the thing, and everything else goes inside of it. So if I remember this correctly, isn't there a hook? In context provider, and then content, and then in theme context. Use context. I believe you do it this way. You do react.create context. We could uppercase that, make it a little easier. And then here you would do context. Is that how you do it? Theme context dot provider and then value. So oops, we need to do context dot provider and then value messages. Put that as an empty object actually. And then inside of that we put all of this. Except I need to, you need to export, don't you need to export the context? Const theme context, right, because toolbar theme context, right. Component describes the context changes. Arrive to a context within a function component. Want the hooks API reference. Use context, that's the one. Accepts a context object returned from react.create context and returns the current context value for that context. Above in the tree to provide the value for this context. So I believe that this would actually happen out here, and this would export const context So now if what's the one that needed add? Is that stop position? So this would, this would be use context, and then here, messages equals use context, but you're gonna need to import, probably easier to name it, messages context from app, and then messages context here, and then we can destructure that into, for example, add should be a thing, so then you can do add as a thing, which means I need to call it messages context, messages context. Context is not defined on app line 94. Right, this is messages context dot provider. Use context is defined right because it's not getting used here. So now failed to compile. Okay. Add. Where was that? That is part of, is that part of stop position? Aha, it is. Wonderful. I think I did it correctly. That seems like the type of thing that would be problematic, actually. Here, and then X. So here, expecting these to still have that lowercase x value. There it is. Now is first a thing? Yeah, so this right first, second, all those types of values. 1st first 1st second 2nd. So this would be first, second. So here would be first and second. First, add another one, second. There you go. Wonderful. Super. Okay, what else is needed here? That looks pretty good. So that is in stop positions. Now flyout is also going to need import, this is messages context from app, and then you're going to need stuff from messages context, except it's use context, messages context, which means you need to import use context from React, and the things you need are what? You need is flyout open. Yep, that's one. Close and open. So close and open, which means we need here, close and open. Add a random color. That's definitely one. Add, I think we're going to organize it like this. Add underscore a random underscore color. I think I like that way. Add a random color. So here, add a random color. Gradient type. A lot of messages in this one. Gradient underscore type. So this would be here, gradient type, gradient type. Now you're also going to have linear, radial, and conic, but these words, those words might get translated, which is why they are not linear, i.e. linear, like that, radial, radial, and conic, conic. But, so for example, the reason that those are both in oops, yeah, see those are gradient words. The reason both of the conic, linear, radial, and conic, right, so the reason linear, radial, and conic are both there is these might get translated to a different thing in different human languages, spoken human languages, whereas the value, the matching on the string always wants to be, I always need it to be literally these characters. And so I do not want that to be translated. But what that does is that makes a collision in using these. I actually forgot a couple of these. Add, or I need close open, need add a random color, also gradient type, add a random color, and also gradient type, and there's linear, radial, and conic. Pardon. Yeah, so we add a random, oh, I was putting them in the wrong spot. Add a random color and gradient type. Yeah, so radial, linear, and conic. Okay, I can leave those from gradient words. So, for example, the spots where you need them for gradient words. So here, this would be gradient words dot linear. Here, gradient words dot radial, and then this would be gradient words dot conic. Also here, if it's gradient words dot radial, same thing here if it's gradient words dot radial. With this one, if it's gradient words dot radial. With this one, if it's gradient words dot linear. And this one, if it's gradient words dot linear, which then means we can, or we don't need these actually. Which means that this needs to be linear. Here, you need to be radial. This one needs to be conic. Okay, degrees, absolutely. We need that. D-E-G-R-E-D. degrees, yes. Degrees, absolutely needed, which means we also need U as part of messages context. This would be an example of a gradient word. That would be a good case for a gradient word for degrees. So for example, degrees, degrees. That's a good example of a gradient word. But the use cases where it gets a gradient word, this would be HTML4. So all of these things would be gradient words dot degrees. Gradient words dot degrees, and then degrees. Ending shape is another one. Ending underscore shape. ENDING shape. So this would be here. These things would be gradient words dot ending shape, which then means in messages you also have an ending shape, but the messages ending shape is ending shape like that, which notice is a very different string than gradient words ending shape. And so we need to have ending shape from messages. All right, circle and ellipse in both cases from messages and also from, so there's the circle from messages, circle, and there's a circle from messages. Ellipse, 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 here, ellipse, right, size, definitely, size, S-I-Z-E, here, oops, S-I-Z-E, yes, size here, size 3 times, that's enough for a gradient word, is S-I-Z-E, S-I-Z-E, so these 3 occurrences of that get gradient words dot S-I-Z-E. Closest side, closest corner, and farthest corner. Definitely. I feel like those should also be closest side, closest side. These should actually, I feel like these should be these should match the actual farthest, what is it? It's side, not size. Farthest side. F-A-R-T-H-E-S-T, side. C-L-O-S-E-S-T, S-I-D-E. C-L-O-S-E-S-T. It's closest corner, C-O-R-N-E-R. Closest, C-O-R-N-E-R. And then F-A-R-T-H-E-S-T, C-O-R-N-E-R. F-A-R-T-H-E-S-T, C-O-R-N-E-R. Closest side would be that. Closest side. Farthest side. would be here. Closest corner would be that. And then farthest corner would be here. Okay. X position, X underscore position, X space position percent, X position, I think I like the percent sign. X position percent sign. We would have another one for Y position, Y space position space percent sign. So X position would have that, like there, and then Y position would be like this. For this one, the X dash position and Y dash position, I think that's enough. So this could have X underscore position, X dash position here, like this. So the IVs would be like that. Sorry, except it is gradient words dot, and then a similar thing for Y position, Y dash position. So this would be gradient words dot Y position. All right, let's see if I made any typos in all of that. Gradient type linear, degrees 90. Okay, there we are. Gradient type radial, ending shape circle. Let's change the X position and also the Y position. Size, closest size, farthest, closest side. I messed up the I think it's side is the name of it. Closest sides, closest side, yeah. CLOSEST-SIDE, CLOSEST-SIDE, yes, side, okay, is the one. Farthest side, closest corner, farthest corner, X position, Y position, right, ending shape circle and ellipse. There you go. Super. Now if we do a conic gradient, we can set the degree and the X position and Y position. You can set it to, can't set it beyond 0. There you go, gradient type conic. Close. Neat. That is in flyout. Colors, okay, there's a fair bit in colors we should do, so we're going to need to Interesting. Interesting that it's still working without importing React from React. But I do actually need, or I will actually need use context from React here, because I will need a couple things, and then use context. And the context I need is import messages context from app. I need the messages context because the things that I need, look at all these. I need color, 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 because we need color from here. Type the color here. Type the color. Type the color. Type the color here. We need that one. Hexadecimal format. This would be, that's quite a long message. Okay, what is a short-ish way of describing what that message is about? What's the message exactly? Hexadecimal format, maybe hexadecimal format explainer? I like that. Hexadecimal format, EXPLAINER. Hexadecimal format explainer. Hexadecimal format explainer. So all of this goes there. That was quite a long one. Put that back over here. Color picker. Okay. Color underscore picker. Color picker, which is like, oops, well, yeah, and then don't need any of that. I need this. Optional stop percents. Optional stop percents. Optional stop percents. Delete color. Delete underscore color. Delete underscore color. And there we go. This is in the colors. There it is. Linear, radial, conic, radial, linear. Excellent. Linear, radial, conic. Excellent. All right, so what we've done now is we've done, oops, that is not how we type get. Messages right. So this is right. This is really extracts hard-coded strings as much as possible into configuration. That's really the general idea here. So this is, we're going to add all of these things. Going to commit extracts hard-coded strings. EXTRACTS hard-coded strings. Yes. All right, good. Next, okay, I really do need to tackle some of these tests before they get ahead of me too much. So which thing do I want to tackle here? Let's do, there was one bit actually in, I believe it's in the flyout, because there's a fair amount of like what's disabled and what's not disabled. So, because what the flyout test logic currently involves, let me leave it there for a moment. Flyout control displays open when closed. Flyout content displays the gradient string. Displays inappropriate. Select flyout content. Okay, this would be, so what would this be? This would be things like, what am I testing? I'm testing displays close when opened, displays open when closed. Flyout content displays the gradient string. Yeah. Displays the gradient string. And flyout content this would be a number of things for displays the appropriate amount of input boxes. Is that tested anywhere else? That's my question here. Degrees, okay, that's add or remove stop position handler. Color deletes a color. Input change handler updates the color. Add a color. Degrees displays an appropriate input, updates the degree on change. Ah, okay, so that's really gradient options is, so any of these updating things are going to have to be tested in app, because they're all part of, because that's all part of gradient options. because, for example, yeah, all this stuff, this gradient type, right, all those things, that's all gradient options. So all of this stuff, input change handler updates the color. It's random color on click. Displays an appropriate input. So this would really be adds tests for each input. Adds tests for each input type and adds tests for each input type. Exists, disabled or not. Exists, disabled or not. Change updates the gradient string correctly. Is that what I want? Yeah, that would be, so it's the click handler, really. Click handler functions correctly. Which then means in flyout, displays an appropriate select, updates the selected gradient type on change. Yeah, all of this really displays the gradient string. So this stuff really needs to be implemented in app because that's where the state changes, the state changing functions are. Okay. Do I want to tackle those things? Yeah, I could probably tackle those things. What would be the other thing to tackle? I believe the other thing would be these gradient utils. It would be this one. That needs a fair amount of updating. The gradient utils, because there is now a... Right, we did a fair amount of work on this one. So this would be essentially gradient utils returns a valid gradient string for linear, radial, and conic gradients. Returns a linear gradient string, handles multiple colors with different amounts of color stops correctly. This would be different types of gradient strings, radial, and conic. Okay, we're gonna do that not today. We're gonna do this one today, the app tests. All right, so what do we need here? So for app, let's do input fields, input change handler updates, and what is the add or remove stop position handler, stop percent change handler, delete color, deletes the color, input change handler, updates the color. Describe, add a color, displays an appropriate button, adds a random color on click. This would be describe, how about gradient options? Let's call it that way. Describe gradient options. So these would be, that's the general idea for these. Gradient options, this would be gradient type, displays an appropriate input. Yeah, that's about it. Setup, expect screen, get by label text. This would be a wonderful place to use messages also. So this would be import messages from constants, no, translations, messages, there. Import. I think it's a default export, isn't it? Yeah, import default. So import, that's a named export, import messages. So, because here, now we would do, for example, the one we want is gradient type. This gradient type. I would like const gradient type equals messages. So now we can put expect screen get by label text gradient type to be in the document. Your default value, expect screen get by label text gradient type, label text, the label text, gradient no, it's not. It's not going to be, except it's not going to be that one because that is the label. I mean, it could be, I could do get by text, but I could also, I need gradient constants. Okay, let's make sure to add that one in. So this is gradient type, which means we need gradient dash type. Gradient dash type. So then here, you need to be all of these. You need to be gradient words dot gradient type, which means you need to be gradient words dot gradient type, which means you're not grabbing it from there, which means you're grabbing, don't need, well, I mean we might, but we can comment it for now, which means we're importing gradient words from, it is a constant, and it is gradient constants. Import gradient words. So gradient words, gradient type to be in the document, and then expect screen get by label text, gradient words. That's going to be the label. I want the value. Expect screen get by, there's a way to grab it by the name. Get by display value. I mean, I could do this one. Screen get by display value 90. I suppose that's fine. Updates the degree. gradient type, except it's not going to be 90, it's going to be linear. Screen get by display value. This would be, do we have gradient words in there? Yes, gradient words dot linear. Screen get by display value. Gradient words dot linear to be in the document. When we X that one, copy relative paths. So when we yarn test, I technically don't need to run all of them. I only need app.test. That seems like a lot of time. Oh my. That is a lot of failed tests. Let's concentrate on yarn test, that one. Screen get by label text, gradient words, gradient type. With it, unable to find a label with the text of gradient type. Interesting. Gradient dash type. Unable to find a label with, oh, is it doing the get by label text? I think it's doing the, yeah, that's not what I want. This would be get by display value. You would need to do, that's the one where I would need to have the distinction here. Gradient words, so gradient type. So there, I am expecting this to pass now. Right, okay, super. So displays an appropriate input. So this next bit would be updates the gradient type, displays an appropriate input, updates the gradient type on change. Gradient type, gradient type, let's be consistent. Gradient type on change, gradient. How am I referring to it elsewhere? Yeah, gradient type. Pardon. So it would be degree input, screen get by display value. This one, get by display value. Fire event change, degree input, target, a value. We're going to change it to, how about radial? Value, gradient words dot radial. Gradient words dot radial. Expect screen get by display value, gradient words dot radial to be in the document. Updates the gradient type on change. There you go. So now it's, yeah. And then there's one other one, gradient type. Describe, so that's gradient type. The next one, this would be degrees. Degrees displays an appropriate input, updates the degree, updates the degrees on change. Screen get by label text. You're going to say 90 default. So we can actually use gradient constants, default gradient options dot degrees, gradient words, default gradient options. So here, this one, screen get by label text, default gradient options dot degrees, expect screen get by label text, except you're not going to be get by display value, default UP gradient words dot degrees, yes, to be in the document, updates the degrees on change, except that's not a degree input, that is a gradient type input, and then fire event change gradient type input, updates the degrees on change. This is screen get by display value. Okay. Target, we could do one additional one, so be 91. And then expect get by display value, that same value to be in the document. Now there will be another one. This would be there's going to be some logic here. Aha, great, okay. That is broken. It looks like undefined was passed instead of a matcher. Screen get by label text gradient. Gradient words dot degree. Pardon. Degrees is what I meant. Unable to find an element with the display value object. Gradient words dot degrees, default gradient options dot degrees, unable to find an element with the display value 91. All right. Get by display oh, that's not the right one. Get by display value, this, default gradient options degrees. Is it going to find it when it sends it as a number? Apparently. Okay. Degrees, so this is disabled degrees. Linear, yeah, because there's going to be a lot of these, so I think it's better to have a separate describe block for each. Disabled or enabled. Enabled, disabled. Enabled, disabled. So this would be or it could be enabled when and I could do it as a thing here. Enabled, disabled. Enabled when, disabled when. So degrees are enabled when linear and linear enabled, conic enabled. Degrees enabled when gradient type is linear, conic, disabled when gradient type is radial. Enabled when gradient type is linear, conic. Right, but I have to find the thing and click it for it to change. It might be... This might be more straightforward to do in... Because this is literally a display thing. I'm not testing the functionality. I'm simply testing whether it displays enabled or disabled. Degrees updates the degrees on change, because I'm only... The update function does need to be... I mean, the update function needs to... I mean, unless I want to render the app component in the tests for flyout. Gradient options, gradient type. Yeah, I think I would like to handle these things. These in the flyout test. The flyout test.js. So for example, flyout content, this would be degrees, because that way I don't need fire event actually, because I can provide to flyout, because it takes gradient options as a gradient options. Yeah. It takes it as a prop, which then means I can degrees enabled when gradient type is. So for instance, do I have the standard setup thing that I do? Yeah, props render, flyout, there's the merge, default props and props. Okay, super. So for instance, when gradient, oh, I did, I do it like that, gradient type, there it is. Okay, so when I do gradient, right, with two T's, yeah, gradient type linear, we can simply expect screen get, except you're gonna need, what are you gonna need? I'm pretty sure you're gonna need these ones. Gradient constants, you're gonna need probably gradient words. Default degree, what is default degree from gradient constants? default degrees. Fly out, you take degrees as a, oh, you did, okay, you don't anymore. Alright, so we don't need this. Nor do we need set degrees. Those are unneeded, and you are now unneeded. Let's remove this stuff. Gradient type and set gradient type. You are unneeded. Gradient type and set gradient type. Okay. So, can we condense some of that? Good, okay. Gradient type linear, so expect screen get by, what is this, degrees, so this is default gradient options, default gradient options dot degrees, get by display value, default gradient options dot degrees to be in the document. That's the gradient constant. Get by, what are you getting? Get by display value. To be in the document, degree input, disabled. Oh, wasn't there something about it doesn't show the disabled status? Let me double check on that, because that is something that I am actually relying on for this whole series of testing. Let's double check on that actually. So that's degree input, which is this whole thing here. And let us console log degree input so we can see what we're working with. Copy relative path, clear that, yarn test that one. Fly out. So what did you grab? Let's do an it only on that one. Unable to find an element with the display value 90. Probably because your gradient options is an empty array. Default gradient options. There. Try again. Degree input is an HTML input element. And type, return child, ref, pending, optimized, update noise, dependencies, mode, flags, next effect, first effect, last effect, lanes, child lanes, alternate actual duration, actual start time, tree debug. Okay, disabled, React props, disabled is false. So does that mean there is if we do something like disabled, if I log it, is that going to show up as a Boolean? Okay, degree input dot disabled. That's useful. So then the expectation here would be expect degree input dot disabled to be false. Okay. Conic would be the same thing. Let's do the other one here. So this would be a setup with radial gradient type. We can actually change those to the constants we just made. Gradient type, get by display value. It's the same thing. It's this degree input. Degree pause. Degree input, and then we don't need this fire event. And it would be, let's do this logging actually here. Well, the first bit would be this one. That would be excellent. Let's do a describe only for here. Did I take the other only off? I did not. Okay. Unable to find an element with the display value 91. Default. Oh, take that expect out. Degree input disabled is false. Okay. Degree input disabled when gradient type is radial. Okay, let's look at this one. Disabled, interesting, is still false. Degree input disabled. So I'm looking at gradient options dot gradient type equals gradient options dot gradient type equals gradient words dot radial. Gradient words dot radial. Gradient words dot radial. I feel like I ran into this before. I feel like it might be. Degrees label for degrees input ID max min name type value. ID max min name type value disabled. Gradient options. Where is... Oh, that's interesting. Gradient options, gradient type equals gradient words dot... Say what now? Gradient option... Okay, let's be more specific here. Gradient options dot gradient type, and then also this gradient words, and also I don't need that whole one there, and probably not the expect. Gradient options dot gradient type is that. Am I spelling that right? Gradient type. Oh. Oh, whoops. That was silly. So that is not the correct shape of that object, because there's a prop object that has a gradient options which has gradient type. There's a prop object, there's a props object which has gradient options which has gradient type. So here, which has gradient type, which has radial. So now I'm expecting that to be true, and we'll see. Okay, there we go. Gradient options, gradient type, gradient true. Gradient words dot radial is radial, gradient options radial. Degree input dot disabled is true. Now I want to find out. I want to see it in this one, so we can comment out these logs. I want to see it in the degree input dot disabled is true. Super. Where'd my degree input log? There you are. Okay, there it is, disabled, true, super. Now give me, I need an expect. So something like screen get by text hi, something that's gonna fail. Radial. Disabled. Interesting. It doesn't actually show the value of. Oh, but it wasn't. That disabled prop wasn't appearing. That disabled prop wasn't appearing when it was. I think that's why, because it's the presence of the disabled prop indicates that its value is true. Because watch this. Watch what happens if I. So for example, if we the 4 degrees, or it would be easier to search for it by ID equals double quote degree that. Disabled, the presence of the disabled prop is present, but watch what happens if we run it again and we're expecting the disabled prop to be false. Yeah, the disabled prop is not, it's not present, and that's what indicates that it is false. All right, cool. That means that this style of testing is going to be possible. Okay, so let's get to it. So this would be, we need this one. Degree input, we can comment these out, expect screen. Disabled when gradient type is, this would be degree input, and this would be expect degree input disabled to be true. To be true. Super. Get rid of these. Take this off. Conic. We can get rid of these. and also these. Conic, we need to this, put that one here, and grab this. Degree input, and then get rid of that, and then expect degree input disabled to be true. With the roll button and name close, because that's radial. This is conic. With the roll button and name close. That's interesting. I'm probably not only running these. Let me only run the degrees ones. Enabled. Enabled, which means it's enabled, which means disabled is false. There you go. Okay. Let's describe only the flyout content. Was that where the other error was happening? No. Okay. Super. Can we, okay, gradient type linear, so these would be, this is actually gradient words, radial linear conic, yeah. So this is gradient words linear. This is gradient words conic, gradient words conic. This is gradient words radial. Super. Degree input. I mean, that's degrees enabled. That doesn't really bother me, actually. Let's do, okay, the same thing. So this is this same thing. Which are you? Are you this one? I feel like you're, yeah, okay. What's next? That's degrees. Now we have ending shape. E-N-D-I-N-G, shape. Ending shape is enabled in radial. That's it. Ending shape is enabled in radial. Ending shape is enabled in radial, and it is disabled in these two. Enabled. Get by display value, the ending shape should be display value, gradient options dot ending shape. Ending shape, and instead of degree input, this should be I could probably simplify this really, because I only need this, and it's this dot disabled to be true. Screen, which one? 70, no, oh, I did the wrong one. Describe. Dot only. It's still running. You're still running that describe block. Not what I wanted you to do. 60, okay, 68. Screen get with the display value circle. Screen get by display value. that is different. Yeah, because that's a select gradient options. So you need gradient options ending shape. So you need gradient options ending shape, default gradient, or rather gradient words, circle. CIRCLA, circle. This would be gradient words, circle. Gradient words, circle. Fly out. Gradient words, circle. So that should work. No, unable to find an element with the display value circle. Ending shape. Okay. Ending dash shape. Select disabled. There's an option with a value of circle. Gradient options dot ending gradient options dot ending shape gradient options the select this is, what do I want? To store as global variable, yes. Temp1 dot value circle CIRCLA. Right. Okay. What am I forgetting here? Oh, display value. I guess display value isn't actually the one I wanted. Display value. I don't think it's actually the one I want. I want React testing library. Are these called matchers? Queries. Maybe FAQ? No. Core API queries. Is it there? There it is. Those are queries. I want the priority. There it is. Get by role. Get by label text. get by label text. Get by label text. Get by label text. Label text. Your label text is, yeah, but your label text is messages, actually. This is import messages from translations messages, and then something messages. You would have ending shape. Get by label text, ending shape. Interesting. Yeah, but is that giving me the label? Unable to find a label with the text of ending shape. How interesting. Okay. Ending label for, and oh, because you're not given. Right, because I need to, what do I need to do? I need to I need to because you get it from context, and the context, let's see, flyout, you get your messages from context, and context is exported from app. Should probably be a test utils. How about a new folder that says test-utils? Or move to trash in utils. New file, we'll call it test-utils. Inside of test-utils, I believe I'm going to need React from React, because I'll definitely need use context from React. Yes, we're going to call it app. Oops, come on. Capital app test container. And this is going to be a function. And this function is going to because this one is going to need to import messages from, or rather, I think the way that I've seen this done before is messages takes messages, and then app test container takes messages and children, and then app test container returns app test container So what exactly are you going to return? You're going to return, you need to invoke, oh, I guess you need to invoke app. You need to invoke app. Yeah. Okay. You need to invoke app. But if app renders, app is going to render fly out, so that's not going to work. So how would, because I feel like you would need, I feel like this function would need to render the, I feel like app test container app test container would need to, or I guess it could, I guess this one would create the context. Is that, I think maybe that's what I need to do. So I do import messages here, pardon, from, and then you gotta go up a level, from translations and then messages, and then so for here, messages, you would create the context. So you would do react create context with an empty object, and this would be messages context, and then you would return here, you would return messages context provider with a value of messages, inside of which you're rendering any children that app test container is given. App test container has a closure over messages. This would be export const app test container. So you don't actually need to use context, you need React though. So app test container. So flyout needs import app test container from utils test utils, which would mean this setup function actually needs to do some other things as well, which means you need to render not just the flyout, but you actually need to render app test container and give app test container a children of flyout. Right, you don't need to return anything. So now my expectation, now I'm expecting to see the message values. Alright, we got an objects are not valid as a React child. Render app test container with flyout. App test. Am I doing that right? App test. App test container is a function that accepts props and then props.children. Okay. Messages, context, provider, value messages, flyout, messages, context, console log, messages, context. Curious to see what it is in here. Messages, context, provider, consumer. Okay. Well, right. What I'd rather. But I need rather, I guess this. I'm looking for the values that I sent to messages context. Okay, so it's coming through empty. Why is it empty? React.create context and then okay, let's do here. If I don't put a default value. Interesting. The value prop is required for context.provider. Okay. The value prop is required for context.provider. Okay. Let me log what messages is here. Let's check one of my assumptions. Okay, that's all of the things. App test container. Messages context dot provider. Import. I'll bet that's what. but that's where it's going awry. Import messages context from app. But how do you get it if, yeah, how do you get messages context if messages context from maybe so if I put that here, what about if I put this here? That means you need to import React, export const messages context. You would need to import messages context from here. Translations messages. Messages context from translations messages, and you would need to do the same thing. Messages context from import messages context from translations messages. So then here in the tests, now that's messages context is not exported from app. Probably at the different, yeah, colors. Okay. Stop positions also. Stop positions here. Okay. Yeah, that worked. So now in the tests here, you would import messages context from app test container messages context, and then message context dot provider React dot create context How are they getting... messages context from translations? Messages. Oh, yeah, because this one and messages renders them. Right. Okay. Which means in this one, messages context, yeah, and the value. Okay. So now in flyout, right, I know. Oh, test. What's in flyout? Test. I don't need these things. Yeah, there it is. Okay. Better. I believe that is how you do it. Test utils. This needs tests. Add tests. Test utils. So for fly out, right. Get by label text, ending shape disabled to be true. And you would do the same thing for enabled, expect screen, ending shape enabled radial, ending shape enabled, expect screen get by label text, and ending shape disabled to be false is the one I want. Describe only. Okay. Let's do expect screen get by text so we can see something. Div label for ending shape disabled is true. Right, I forgot. Okay, you also need gradient type. This is describe when gradient type is radial. I forgot the gradient type radial. Gradient type radial. Text matcher height, right. There you go. Disabled when gradient is. All right. Disabled when gradient type is linear. Gradient words linear, and this is ending shape gradient words circle. And this is, we can simplify it a bit. And this is disabled, so we expect disabled to be, oops, lowercase, true. Screen get by labeled text ending shape disabled to be true. And you would do the same thing for conic. Gradient words, conic. And this one here. Those. Super. All right, let's get rid of this stuff. can probably simplify this a little bit. This is the get by label text. What is the label text for degree? Yeah, what is your label text? Degrees. Super. Okay, we can simplify it. So we could simply do expect get by label text could simply actually be degrees, D-R-E-G, degrees, which means we need to add degrees, and then disabled to be true, except not uppercase. We can simplify some of that. Get by label text. Wonderful. True. Except that is enabled, which means disabled should be false. Something is enabled when disabled is false. And the same thing here. Because I forgot to change true to false. There we are. Alright, I like that a little bit better. That's ending shape. How much time do we have? 6 o'clock. We've done degrees, ending shape. There are degrees, ending shape. There are several more. There's size, X position, and Y position, which I don't believe we're going to get to today, or at least not in this session right now. There is, what is there? There is more. Size, X position, and Y position. X position and Y position. All right. We accomplished a fair amount today. So this now is, let's close this out. Not the whole thing. Let's take a look at, oh my, a lot of things. All right, take a look at the diff. Where are you from? Are you an app? Yeah, let's clean this up a little bit. Diff. Okay. Let me clean it up a little bit in, who is this? This is, oh, that's the app tests. So the app tests, so this is disabled or not, this is handled in fly out tests. Click handler functions correctly. Gradient options, gradient type degrees. So this one we need to finish size, X position, and Y position. Size, X position, and Y position. We can remove all of that. Testing actually in flyout, in actual flyout, not the test for it. Can remove all of this. Test container, gradient words. Right. right, super. So let's add all of this, and then we'll commit this. So this is, what is this? This is a work in progress. We're not finished this content. And this is adds tests for, this is really the input fields, gradient options input fields. Gradient options input fields. Oops, like there. Work in progress adds tests for gradient options input fields. Super. All right, let's push to origin. What, am I on main? Is that the one I'm on? Yeah. So push origin main. Yes. Wonderful. Super. Okay, so that is the end of today's session. For next time, we're going to continue with these couple more tests for the size, x position, y position for the disabled or not for each type of gradient, and we'll finish up with these tests for the exists and the click handler functions correctly for those same couple positions. And then after that, we'll see what we're doing next. All right, that's it. Bye.